In my last video, I discussed how self-doubt can be a nightmare for new writers, and judging by some of the comments below the video, I think it resonated quite deeply. So this time I want to return to the subject of doubt, but consider a different aspect of it, something I noticed over and over again while teaching Oxford University's online writing fiction course, namely the belief that a lot of new writers seem to have that there is some sort of writing cop handing out tickets for doing it wrong. And I will demolish this myth by sharing an insight I gained from a remarkable event that took place in Germany in the 1960s when an amateur archaeologist discovered the remains of the witch's house from Hansel and Gretel. So welcome to another installment in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. So for inspiration, we're going to take the bus from the High Street to Headington and set off in search of the grave of C.S. Lewis. But to set the scene, I want you to consider a typical writing textbook. Inside you'll find chapters on character and plot and structure and setting and theme and, well, just about everything really, except the one thing you need, the bit that tells you what exactly it is you're supposed to be doing. Why do I say that? Well, consider what happens when you write. You pick up the pen, you press it to the page and it begins to move, and inky black squiggles emerge. And then what happens? Well, if you're anything like me, you disappear. At least your conscious awareness does. You enter a sort of trance-like state, and this is where the writing happens, beyond your deliberate control. And really, you only find out what you've written after you finished when you read it back. And then when you encounter difficulties, as we all do, you think there's this nagging feeling that maybe there's a special technique that the published writers use that you don't know about, something they won't tell you about. And it's true, there is a special secret technique, and they're all sworn to secrecy about it. There is in fact a culture of omerta, making sure they don't tell. Okay, I'm kidding. The truth is, they don't know either. They say they just start writing, and very often they have nothing, almost nothing to start with, just a phrase or a picture or a fragment, anything. And when I say they don't talk about it, that's the opposite of the truth. They talk about it all the time, but no one believes them. This is the grave of C.S. Lewis. No doubt you're familiar with the Narnia series, the wonderful series of novels set in the mystical land of Narnia, aimed for children but loved by adults as well. According to Lewis, he never intended it from the start. All he had for many years, he said, for 20 years, was an image in his heart of a faun rushing home carrying parcels. And then the faun became Mr. Tumnus, and from that was derived the whole series. And Lewis is far from being unique. Ursula Le Guin said that she was inspired to write her famous novella, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, after driving down the interstate highway and seeing a sign in a rearview mirror saying, Salem, Ohio. And she thought, Omelas, I wonder what happens there. And Neil Gaiman said a similar thing. He typed Caroline, but mistyped and it came out Coraline. And so he wondered, who's Coraline? And from that sprang the novella, which has turned into a musical and a movie. And John Steinbeck said, I've written a great many stories and I still don't know how I do it. I just write it and take my chances. And I think Kurt Vonnegut probably said it best. He said, we writers have to be continually jumping off cliffs and growing our wings on the way down. Well, that's quite daunting, isn't it? Growing your wings on the way down. We want control. We want to see the whole picture. We want to know where we're going. And that's understandable. That's natural. But the thing is, if this is how the pros do it, what is there to worry about? It dispenses with the writing cop. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? To see how embracing this insight can lead to great unintended story ideas, consider an idea I had for a story. It began with nothing but a fragment, the words foundling wheel, which I'd heard somewhere. What is a foundling wheel? Well, I didn't know, so I looked into it. And apparently the plight of an unmarried mother in the Middle Ages was so terrible that very often the child would be left as a foundling on the church steps. And it happened so frequently that many religious institutions would build a foundling wheel, which is a movable rotating cylinder, into the walls of the institution. So the mother would come and put the baby in, turn the wheel, and then ring the bell, alerting the Holy Sisters to the child. And quite often she would include something called a foundling token, which is something to help her identify the child as hers if she ever returned. It could be half a coin, or a strip of cloth, or half a prayer, and she would provide the other half. Although apparently it very seldom happened. Well, it sounds like a good seed idea for a story, doesn't it? I'm sure if I sat down and just wrote it, it would come out something like a Dickensian Oliver Twist story. It's not my style at all. So I cogitated upon it. I thought about it for weeks. And it reminded me of the story of Hansel and Gretel, which had always struck me as a rather cruel story to tell to children about mum and dad abandoning their children in the forest. I'd heard that it was a folk memory of the time after the great plagues of the Middle Ages, when times were so hard that parents would abandon their children in the wood because they couldn't afford to feed them. Was it true? Well, I looked into it, and I discovered a book published in Germany in 1963 that contained an astonishing revelation about Hansel and Gretel, and I'll tell you about it after this short commercial break. This is me 50 years ago. And this is my old school chum, Marty, who died on a cross-country run during the winter of '75. And this is my old school games teacher, Herod Jenkins, who sent Marty on that run, even though he had a note from his mum asking for him to be excused because he had tuberculosis. Well, I expect you all have a story like that to tell. But did you know there is a special machine that enables you to get revenge 40 years later? It's called a typewriter. Put your old school games teacher in a novel. I did. Get Gateway to Narnia, my free 10-part email course on how to write your first novel. Gateway to Narnia. The link is in the description below. Well, the book caused a sensation in 1963 when it was published because it claimed that the story of Hansel and Gretel was true. It was written by a man called Georg Oseg, who was an amateur archaeologist who devoted his entire life to locating the witch's house. He used parish records and aerial photography, ground-piercing radar, and he even located the clearing where the children were abandoned by getting an 8-year-old boy and filling his pockets with white pebbles and getting him to drop them along the way. And it turned out that eventually he located the house where the witch lived, or the remains of it, and in the basement he found the charred skeleton of the witch. And it seems that Hansel and Gretel were really Hans and Gretel Metzler, two 15th century outlaws, and they murdered the witch for her gingerbread recipe. Well, I mean, it caused a sensation. The tabloid, the Abendzeitung, called it the book of the century. And well, it was a hoax, of course, but it took everybody in. But it didn't bother me that it was a hoax, because as soon as I heard the phrase Hansel and Gretel Metzler outlaws, I had my story, because I instantly saw a picture of Bonnie and Clyde, and I thought, wow, what fun this would be if we have Hansel and Gretel are a 15th century Bonnie and Clyde. So I thought we'd set it in the war-torn and famine-scarred landscape after the 30 Years' War. Hansel and Gretel, two outlaws on a killing and robbing spree, cutting a dash. They kill and they rob whatever the medieval equivalent of banks is, and they're sung about in the taverns as folk heroes. And of course they have their blaze of glory ending as they die in a hail of gunfire, although it would be musket fire rather than Tommy gunfire. And of course on their trail there's always the world-weary cop, isn't there? Or in this case, it will be the witchfinder. And the cop's always on the eve of retirement, isn't he? So this is the witchfinder's last case. Well, it's good fun, I think. And just for extra interest, we'll make Gretel a foundling with a foundling token around her neck. And who was the father? Well, picture the scene. Hans is dead and Gretel survives, and the witchfinder looks down at her injured body and he notices the foundling token around her neck and he recognizes it. And his mind travels back 20 years to the time when he seduced a scullery maid and abandoned her and left her with child, and she put the child into a foundling wheel and included as a token something belonging to the witchfinder. So this gives us two possible endings. The witchfinder looks down, and his heart breaks. He's filled with love for his long-lost daughter, and he picks her up tenderly and takes her to the Archbishop's palace where she will be looked after and live a life of splendour. Or he looks down at her, sees the foundling token, and realises that this could ruin him, so he picks up a pillow and smothers Gretel. Well, you take your pick, but I'm going for the happy ending. And if you want to see a video about how to do a happy ending, uplifting ending, there should be one appearing on the screen now. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to grab Gateway to Narnia.